Hello, my name is Hannah Baker, and I work in the Zazada lab at the USDA ARS in Corvallis, Oregon. And today I'm going to be talking about where are the nematodes, sampling to facilitate nematode management decisions. So our lab is part of an overall project called PAPAS, which is working with scientists to look at the soil health of potato fields across the country. We are looking at every component of soil health that we can, but our lab and those that we're working closely with in the region are involved in determining the nematodes' role in the potato soil health. So we have several objectives for this, but the one I will be talking about today is deploying improved diagnostics and predictive models to provide growers with decision support and economic thresholds for potato nematodes. And specifically, I'm going to be talking to you about sampling rate and nematode distribution. You may be asking, why should I sample for nematodes? Well, sampling for nematodes is a very useful tool for us to help identify who's in the field because we can determine the types of nematodes that are present and the quantities at which they are present through sampling. We can then also help predict the damage to the crop by knowing the nematodes present and help make management decisions. Our data is only as good as the quality of the sample collected, which is why I'm talking to you today, because in order for us to make those decisions, we need to work with you to decide where we need to sample and how much we need to sample so that we can get you the best answers and information possible. There are several methods of soil sampling, including use of a soil probe, a shovel, or using hand sampling or other examples. But soil probes and shovels are the main ones that we use in our lab. Some important sampling considerations include the number of samples that you're taking, the depth to which you're sampling, the time of the year, the soil properties, and the field history. So I'm specifically going to be talking about the number of samples, the depth, and the time of the year. So starting with the number of samples. So when deciding the number of samples you want to take, there are a lot of factors at play, including the field history, the soil properties you're working with, if you know where the nematodes are already or have a general idea, or other things that you would know about your field when making those decisions. There are a lot of different options that we have, with our lowest intensity sampling being about 4 composite samples for 140 acres, which would make it about 1 sample for every 35 acres. We then also have our medium level of sampling, which is 8 composite samples for your 140 acre pivot, which would make it about a sample every 17.5 acres. So that's mid-level and gives us a bit more clarity on the overall picture of your field. We also have the most extreme forms of sampling, which are 70 composite samples for your 140 acre pivot, which means samples for every 2 acres. You could even do 1 acre and get 140 composite samples. That's up to you and what you would like to do with your field, but extreme sampling could be useful if you are just starting in a field and really want to get a good lay of the land. As I've mentioned before, some of the considerations for the number of samples are the field soil type you have, your cropping history, and your other variables. And so the greater the proportion of the field included in the sampling process, the greater the probability that the sample estimate represents the field situation. So I always say, and we always say, you know your field better than anyone else, which is why we like to work with you when determining the sampling map and the type of sampling that we're going to be doing, because we would like that insider knowledge and we'd like to give you the best information we can. So all of those things play a role in our decision for numbers of samples that we're going to take, but they're considerations nonetheless. So just a quick recap of what we know about plant parasitic nematode densities in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to start with our lower density nematode that we find in this area, which is Paratrichodorus or stubby root, and typically you see about 31 per 250 cc's of soil. Then for middle density, we have M. haplo, which is the northern root knot nematode, which is about 67 per 250 cc's of soil. And then we have our high density nematodes, which are Meloidigine chitwoodi, or the Columbia root knot, and then Pratylanchus, the root lesion nematode, which sit about 140 to 150 nematodes per 250 cc's of soil. And while we see high density as a Meloidigine chitwoodi, that is Clearly not what we want. As Meloidica insipidi, there's very low tolerance in the potato industry for its presence, and it can cause massive losses to growers. So while this is the density that we're seeing of Meloidica insipidi in the region of the Columbia root knot, we would like to be seeing numbers much closer to that of stubby root for this specific nematode. So then we are now going to talk about the probability of detecting nematodes. So the probability will depend on the number of samples collected and the nematode target. Starting with our low density nematode, the stubby root nematode. As I mentioned, it's found in this region about 31 nematodes per 250 cc's of soil. And even though we find it in low densities, it can still result in corky ring spot on potato, as you can see in the picture on the right. And it being present in low densities means that in comparison, let's say you try to buy a lotto ticket to enter the lottery, you say you have one ticket per the entire population of people that have bought tickets before you. So there's a very low chance of you finding it or winning the lottery. Then we have the medium density nematode, which is the northern root knot nematode. And on average, this is found in our region at 67 nematodes per 250 cc's of soil. And while this nematode can cause direct damage to tubers, it's not as much as the Columbia root knot nematode and is not as controlled as the Columbia root knot nematode, but it can still cause a lot of damage and can be a big pest for growers. And since it's medium density, we now have 5 lotto tickets for the population of people that are buying lotto tickets. So we have a higher chance, but it's still low. Then we have our high density nematode. So this is our root lesion nematode, which on average is found in our region of about 146 nematodes per 250 cc's of soil. It is very widespread in our area, and it is potentially part of the potato early dye complex in the Pacific Northwest, but more research needs to be done to determine that. On the bottom left, you can see the damage done by root lesion nematode to a field, and to continue our analogy, as a high density nematode, you've got a lot more lotto tickets now. It's much likelier that we are going to find you or that your name is going to be pulled to win that money. So that's why we end up seeing root lesion so much, is because it does exist in these high densities. So back to our number of samples and our extreme, mid, and low sampling plots or plans. You can see that for a low density nematode, you can see that in our lowest sampling, it is present. We probably are going to miss it based on where we're sampling, which would be unfortunate, because this could be for stubby, which we know even at low densities can cause damage. You may also miss it if you're doing the medium level sampling, but the chances of getting it in the most extreme, so either 1 or 2 acre samples, you're more likely to find it, and you're more likely to get an understanding of where it actually is in the field because you have smaller areas composing those composite samples. So we can actually pinpoint and have a better idea of where this low density nematode is if we can find it. We also have our medium density nematode where, again, an example, you potentially would find it in the low, higher likelihood of finding it in the medium, a much higher likelihood of finding it in the extreme because of its density that it normally exists at. And again, the medium density is about our northern root knot nematode, which is a problem, but not as big of a problem as the Columbia. But again, we can find the exact locations where these nematodes are present and be able to control the field better and have a better idea of the distribution we're looking at. And then finally, we have our high density nematode, which was the root lesion nematode. And so here, again, you can see that you'd probably find it for low intensity sampling. Medium, you'd most likely find it. And then you're definitely finding it if you're doing an extreme sampling. And as I said before, a more distinct location of where those nematodes are. So with the different schemes in mind, we recommend that starting with an intensive sampling at a high cost can help you in the future going forward and understanding the field that you're working with. So if you have no idea who's in your field, where they are, then we recommend this. And then as you go forward, you can identify those problem areas, sample them intensively, and sample the rest of the field as usual. So then you're still monitoring your whole field, but you're not spending all of the money to intensively sample the whole thing if you know some areas are generally clear. And as we mentioned, it's important to know who your nematode target is and what you're concerned about, because different nematodes have different dispersal patterns. So examples of nematodes that tend to be clustered, as you can see in the top image on the right, tend to be root knot nematode and stubby. So they're going to be more clustered, and you're going to be able to control them in those smaller spaces. But if we find lesion, which is our high density nematode, they tend to be dispersed, so it would require larger areas to be controlled and can give you a better idea of where you need to fumigate and information pertaining to that. And so this can also help you modify how you sample over time, so that if you are doing the intensive sampling or you need to go back there, you have an idea of what your field is and what the playing field that you're working with is. So now I'm going to talk about the depth distribution of nematodes, and we currently don't have any specific data that I'm going to be presenting here, but I'm going to give you a general idea, and we have data from over 100 fields now, so hopefully we'll be able to present that soon. So depth distribution of nematodes is an important consideration, because we know people have looked at and studied the horizontal movement of nematodes, but less so the vertical movement of nematodes. So what this project entails is sampling in the spring prior to planting, the summer, which is about the end of June, fall, which is going to be after harvest, and then winter, which is about December, January, in the dead of winter. And so what this is going to entail is using a gas-powered post pounder to take soil cores up to 3 feet using a plastic tube, which will then contain the soil. Then once we bring the soil back, we can process it as 1 foot, 2 foot, or 3 foot sections, so we can get an idea of who is present and where. Here you can see the depth distribution of nematodes data from Hermiston, Oregon. And you can see that on the left, we have the Columbia root knot nematode for its sampling in spring, summer, and fall. And you can see that the highest number of the Columbia root knot nematode was during the fall, which was after harvest, and after the growing season, which is when these nematodes reproduce. They are also primarily present at 1 and 2 feet, with a little bit of presence at 3 feet, which is more than it had in the spring and summer, meaning they may be moving further down, or that's just how the population is distributing itself. We also saw the root lesion nematode in all 3 fields, but here we're starting with Hermiston, and you can see that the root lesion nematode really had high population numbers in the spring before planting, and then decreased as the season went on. Now we can look at the depth distribution of nematodes data from Prosser, Washington. And here we found stubby root nematode, and this is the only one of the 3 fields sampled for this project that we found stubby in. And here we found stubby present in the spring and in the fall, but with much higher levels in the spring, but it may be coming back in the fall with low levels in the summer. And as I mentioned before, stubby is the lower density nematode, so it was very exciting that we were able to find it present in this field and get the data that we were able to get. We also found root lesion again in the Prosser, Washington field, and there is less of a trend here. They are clearly present at 3 feet, which is excellent information to know, but the trend is a little bit more evading, so we're going to have to do more work and clearly watch the root lesion populations as the seasons progress. We then also did sampling in Othello, Washington, where again we found the Columbia root knot nematode, and you can see here that again it is the opposite trend as before, where it has a high population numbers in the spring and then lower in the fall, which is opposite of what we saw in Hermiston. We then also have the root lesion nematode again, which was found in all 3 fields, as I mentioned. And here you can see that, again, no real clear trend, high presence at 1, 2, and 3 feet across all seasons, and a much higher presence at 3 feet, which is very interesting. When looking at the data that we were able to collect for Hermiston, Prosser, and Othello, the trends in the nematode distribution across the seasons are not clear at this point, but we have one more year of data to collect, and hopefully we will be able to get some clarity on what those trends are. This project is also evaluating the role of soil type on nematode distribution and how that is overall playing a part. The overall goal of PAPAs is to work to provide potato growers with data-driven strategies to better sample for nematodes so that we can provide you with the best answers and management strategies that we can. You can go ahead and use the QR code on the top right, which will link you to our videos that we've developed for different potato experiments that we are doing in our lab. And then if you are interested in participating in research, you can use this QR code on the bottom left and be able to contact us and tell us who you are and for a greater scheme project looking at root lesion in the Pacific Northwest. If you would like to check out new potato nematode news, you can use this QR code and go to the PAPA's website and get all of that information there. And I would like to say thank you, and are there any questions?